All right, we're going to go over your new vent saws. These are the rotary based vent saws. Obviously the chainsaw could be used for roof ventilation, but this definitely does provide some other options, specifically in flat roof ops. It's a powerful saw, high speed blade. It eats roof material, the blade that's on it. It's just very resilient and less likely for certain failures. Kind of like chainsaw, chain can be thrown off of a chainsaw. You don't run into that with this one, so it's a lot more reliable. All right, so a couple differences in these. The ergonomics are different. It's a lot more user friendly as far as choke and starting procedure goes. It's a lot lighter weight saws, which is a benefit for us when we're traversing ladders, climbing ladders, ground ladders or aerial ladder. It's just nice having a lightweight, powerful platform. It just makes our job that much easier. So good choice with the Husqvarna. It's what we run at Ione and McGregor, and it's pretty much an industry standard with these. Just to kind of give a little plug on how official it is. It's the saw that FDNY chooses for their roof ops, and they're a very flat roof heavy use saw there, so it only makes sense that we kind of examine what they use. All right, so we'll take a look at this one right here. It's got a 12-inch blade, right, versus a 14-inch blade on your forcible entry saw. A lot of people ask, how come such a small blade? Pretty simple concept. I like to make this little analogy where if you look at the size of disc brakes on race cars, right? Disc brakes on race cars are very big, right? And the reason is because the bigger the disc, the more stopping power. So if you consider the disc, the cutting disc, the brake rotor, and you consider the roof material, the caliper, right? You see how that concept applies, right? So the smaller the surface area on the blade, which is like on the 12-inch, you're going to have less likelihood of the roof material bogging your blade down. It's going to give you a lot cleaner cut, a lot more streamlined without getting hung up, right? So they do have 14-inch options of these, but I choose to stay away from them and just stick with the 12. It's a 12 tooth, right? Which is a lot more resilient for cleaning out material. They have ones that are 32, 31, 32 teeth. These gullets right here, they clean out material a lot better, right? So it's a lot more streamlined in making the cuts. We'll get into that in a little bit more depth in a second. All right, so these saws, we kind of want to label them by their function and not necessarily by their brand, right? I know, some guys will call these the steel saw or the Husqvarna, but it's better practice to know these as their function. Like this is the rotary roof saw. This one's going to be the forcible entry saw, and that one's going to be the chainsaw, right? We all know their functions. We're all professionals here in our capacity at the fire department. It's just knowing the function. It's a lot more streamlined when we need it for its task, calling it by its name for its task, all right? So this one's going to be the roof rotary. This is going to be the forcible entry saw, and that's going to be the chainsaw. Couple choices need to be made on the roof, right? And I say specifically on the roof because we never know what the roof is going to be. So based on our inspection cut, that's going to determine the most appropriate saw, right? So we're going to take this full tool, saw complement to the roof. It just eliminates back and forth and radio transmission calling for extra saws or anything. Just take your full saw complement to the roof. We're going to make our inspection cuts. The material that we're up against is going to determine what saw we go forward with, right? A lot of flat roof operations are going to be conducive to the rotary, all right? Especially if there's any kind of Q decking or built up roof. The chainsaw is not very resilient there, and that's where this one kind of shines, all right? The chain, obviously, if you're hitting any kind of steel members, roof rafters or anything like that, that chain could completely be thrown and that saw's out of service. Where this one can hit those. We don't advocate for staying on them, hitting them, but it can hit them and still be good for use, right? So it's a lot more resilient there. So I mentioned that these can be used or are really good for being used on flat roofs. They're not only for flat roofs, you can use them on pitch roofs. One of the things I kind of like to stay away from with these is your typical residential roof in some cases, because this blade is so sharp and so fast. It's hard to get the feel of the roof rafters with these, so you can be a lot more likely to cut through roof rafters, okay? I'll Pretty much in our area with the building stock that we have, I'll advocate for using the chainsaw in most residential applications. But anything commercial, and also I'm not taking anything away from it. You can use it. You just have to be a lot more in tune with the saw and understand, have a little more finesse and understand what the saw is doing, okay? Just so you don't make any mistakes up there. As far as what these blades can cut, right, it's like I was saying earlier, it's a 12 tooth, 12-inch blade with carbide tips. So it's good at cutting wood, any kind of roof material, built-up roof, built-up membrane. It can cut some light gauge steel, which like Q decking, for example. So, you know, it's pretty much your conventional roof materials, what it's designed to cut. Your chainsaws got the same carbide teeth, but we talked about some of the weaknesses in that, right? They get thrown pretty easily in your commercial setting. We do have some commercial roofs that are wooden. Those are fine with a chainsaw, but anytime you get into your steel members, that's where the chainsaw kind of loses its function. The forcible entry saw. The forcible entry saw has got a 14-inch diamond blade on it, right? Everybody's familiar with that. It's pretty much a standard in our business. For cutting concrete, hurricane glass, metal, any kind of general materials, just not very good at cutting rubber or wood or anything like that. It would burn its way through that versus cutting it, all right? So this is a lot bulkier platform. Like I was talking about, getting this up and down a ladder is a little bit more cumbersome. That one's a lot more streamlined, so I think that's why Estero decided to kind of go towards that platform over there. They all run 50-to-1 mix. They're all standard across the board, so there's no special mixing you need to do for any of those. We're going to get into some actual equipment specifics, some quick morning checkout stuff, general like weekly maintenance type things, and just ongoing inspection type stuff, just to make sure your saws stay healthy and running well. All right, so we'll talk about the blade a little bit. Right, this is a 12-inch Roof Max, carbide tips. It's got large gullets for cleaning out material. Right, sometimes you'll see a little thinner space in between here. This is a very good blade because it just cleans away that roof material once these make the cut. All right, so these are directional, indicated by an arrow right here. What I like to do with mine, sometimes these get ground out over time. These get ground out by this thing getting put on and taken off. So I like to take a big Sharpie and put a nice arrow in that direction, and it kind of just makes it stand out for everybody, okay? Do that right in the beginning when it's a brand new blade, and you can't go wrong. So we want to make sure that this blade spins in this direction. Rotary saws are a forward spinning saw, right? So we want to make sure that these cutting tips, these carbide tips, are hitting the roof material at a forward spinning direction. You can put this on the saw backwards, right? And it would come this way, and this is what would make the contact with the roof material, and that would be a dangerous thing actually. It would make the saw kind of buck and do some dangerous things, all right? So make sure you've got it on this way, right? Forward spinning direction, pretty straightforward. All right, so it's got a 1-inch arbor, right? You always want to make sure that this flange plate is on here. This arbor right here is removable, so you want to make sure that it is on, right? Because that's what's going to center the blade and make it right, right? So we know that this is going to spin forward, so these are going to make contact with the roof material. You want to put the other side flange plate on here, right? Your bolt goes on. All right, once you get it, it's always better to do that with it on its side. It just makes it a little bit easier than doing it standing up, because sometimes it can bump off of that arbor, right? So do it like this, get it just finger tight. Once you get it basic tightness on it, you can just come here and don't be afraid to get these nice and tight, right? Real good and tight. Give it a quick little spin and make sure nothing seems like it's hung up, right? You notice a little bit of friction in here. It doesn't spin nice and loose like when the saw is just turned off and it stays spinning. There's actually a brake inside of here that's designed to slow this blade down, right? So that's what you're feeling. So you're normally gonna feel a little bit of resistance in these, right? And that's perfectly normal. Your shroud, you want to make sure that it adjusts depending on your cut angle, depending on the pitch of the roof. Sometimes you're going to want to make that work in your favor. So just morning check, make sure that that works all right. All right. Obviously fuel, it's got a little pop-up cap on this side. Just pop, it's like a little finger lever, makes it come up. Right, full saw, all the way full, not half full. All right, so I guess you're not pull ready, right? But normally that would be your full choke, straight out or off choke. That's all you need to do. There's no half choke on this one, right? This right here is kind of important, right? Want to pay attention to this, make sure you guys know about this, because you can create a flooding situation if you're not careful with this. This is a momentary switch, right? With a momentary switch, it's spring loaded and it comes right back, right? But if you push it all the way, it'll be in an off position. So if my saw is choked and that's in a full off position and I start pulling it, it'll flood the carburetor, right? So anytime this is in its ready state here, in between that range, it's going to be hard to get this saw to flood. So at my department, we normally don't ever turn it off. We'll just kill the saw just by doing this and then let it go and it's ready to go. It's designed to do that, all right? This right up top is your decompression valve, right? Right now it's compressed, but normally it would pop up and you just feel it push down. It's just got a little rubber seal on it so no debris gets inside of there. We have a D-handle starter here, real glove friendly, just makes it easy for us, all right? Your wrench is on board, so if you have any kind of, if your blade starts getting loose on the roof, which is uncommon, but it's there for you to have it with you. We're gonna get into inspection aspect of it and just making sure the saw's, all its moving parts are working correctly, all right? So I'm gonna take this off one more time. This would be the full procedure for doing that. So right here is your belt tensioner. These saws have a belt, that's what drives them, right? It's got the drive motor over here and it's got a pulley over here that spins the blade, and the belt is what actually drives that. You want to make sure that belt is tensioned. These are pretty simple system. It's just off tension, on tension, and it's spring loaded, right? So that's off and that's on. So to take these off, you want to make sure you take the tension off first. All right, just loosen them. All right, now there's two little screws, right? You're gonna have one right inside of here and one right here. This is important, like after you do some training or an actual roof job, you want to get into this every single time. So it's not one of those set and forget it things. Unlike a forcible entry saw, they stay relatively clean. They just get some metal shavings on them every now and then. Once you get into a roof, the saw is covered in tar. And every single time you're done with it, you have to break it down and get the tar off of it. Or else you wind up with a mess. So I recommend to you guys, just, I don't know if you want it on here, just small talk here, getting one of those parts cleaners, a parts cleaning bin that has the parts cleaning liquid in it. You come back from a job, you set this in there, and it just sprays the stuff out of the scrub brush. It knocks it all right off of there. So this is the belt system, right? This will come off, and this is independent. All right, this is the part that's important. A lot of times with these belts, depending on heat exposure, if it's sat there and kind of spun in one spot, you can kind of get a brittle spot in here if it gets hot. You want to make sure that there's no cracks or fraying. It's kind of like a thread inside of here. You don't want to see too much thread sticking out, and you want to turn it over and make sure that these splines look healthy and not cracked, all right? So just a basic, take it, squeeze it in your hands, and if you don't see any cracks open up, you're usually doing pretty good, all right? This is the clutch and drive mechanism, right? That's where the actual engine is. And then the belt goes around, and this is the drive pulley. So you want to make sure both of those pulleys look good and don't have too much stuff gummed up inside of them. And you actually, the other one kind of looks similar to this. You want to make sure that these are clean and nothing looks, you know, out of whack. Before you tighten those down too far or move too far in the process, just make sure that the belt still spins, because a lot of times it can get pinched under this housing somewhere. So just make sure you're good there. All right. Now for this here, the nuts stay retained in this thing, so it's pretty simple that way. So this part's important, okay, putting this thing back together. The first thing we want to do is get these finger tight. All right, so I'm just going to use the wrench to basically get them finger tight. All right, back them off just a little bit. You still want this section to be able to float, because then we're going to be tensioning it. If you tighten these down first all the way, the tensioner won't do anything because it's already locked down into its position. All right, so we want to make sure that this is loose enough for this thing still to be able to float. All right, so I'll give it a basic tighten, turn off a little quarter turn on each of these, right? Then I'll come back to the tensioner, and you'll notice this gap right here is going to get larger. All right, so now it's tension. Once that's tension, now I can lock these down to lock it into place. All right, and then same thing we talked about earlier, putting our blade on and your bolt. All right. All right. Sounds good. So starting procedure, we're going to go ahead and start it now. We're going to make sure that it's on a run position, it's fully choked, and the decompression valve is in. All right, so that was kind of like our first little pop. Maybe made the decompression valve go off. I'm going to turn the choke off. We'll try it and see what it does. All right, I'm going to choke it a little bit more. We're going to talk about a few things with if the saw stalls out like on a smoky roof. There's a couple things we can do to make it easier starting for us. All right, so right here is our choke, okay, and I'll give you an example of this after I talk about it. Obviously it's just hard to talk over a running saw. Okay, so let's say for example cold saw, right? We're just starting it at a fire. So we're going to find it in this position possibly, right? We're going to fire it up. Saw is going to be running, right? Put that in, normal running saw. And let's say for some reason it's smoky and the saw bogs out. But now we want to start it back up, but it's a smoky roof. So we know that this relies on high levels or normal levels of oxygenation in the air for it to run. So it might sputter a little bit. What we can do is put this into high idle, and what we can do for that is pull the choke out completely and then push it right back in, and that kicks it into a high idle. All right, and I'll give you an example of that now. All right, so I'm going to start it up and just adjust the carburetor real quick for a second. Okay. The reason I'm doing that, these are designed normally for like concrete work or just, you know, trade work. With a roof saw, we want them to be a little bit on the higher idling side, because obviously we're going to be working in smoke. And these, you know, they don't like breathing smoke. So if we bump up the idle a little bit, it's more likely to stay in its normal running zone. Right? Alright, so now I'm going to give you an example of that high idle start. Okay, so we'll assume that the saw has been running. It's a smoky roof. We want to restart it, but it's having a hard time restarting because of the smoky environment. This is kind of a little something we can do to make that a little bit easier. All right, so I'm going to shut it off. You saw how it was at a low idle there. The blade wasn't spinning. So if I take this choke and I pull it out and I push it right back in, obviously decompression valve every time you start it, it's going to put it into a high idle. See how the blade's spinning? Okay, it's going to be more likely to start and run. And just a little blip of the throttle, it drops right back into that low idle. But at that point, you'd normally get right back into cutting. Okay, so see how I put it in a high idle? This is all you need to do to shut it off, right? And it springs right back to its ready start position. You don't need to lock it out at its fully locked out stop position. Just right here, and then let it go. Easy stop, all right? So we're gonna go over just your basic start, just to keep general saw health for its longevity, right? We don't wanna start it up and just go right into redlining the saw, right? Revving it up super high. We don't do that with our own vehicles on the street, right? Start them up and floor them down the street. You want to let them warm up a little bit. Same concept applies to the saw. It's just good for the motor, all right? So my normal morning start would be ready to go. Right? It's going to start in high idle. So initially it'll ramp up like that. I'll blip the throttle and then it'll go into its low idle and I'll just leave it there for a minute or so, 45 seconds or whatever. So let it kind of warm up, let the lubrication get in there, and then I'll give it a little rev up. I won't just peg it, right? Just a little rev up, kind of let it know what's going to happen, right? What we're going to be doing with it. And ease into that, and then alright, and once you're done revving it up, you can peg it for a while, but there's no need to. These saws are designed to be fully revved up only under load. Right? If I rev this saw up while it's sitting on the apron and just peg it and leave it pegged, it's actually bad for the motor. They're designed to have some kind of resistance on the blade, right? So just giving it, you know, a little 5-second run and then off, then a little 5-second run, you know, 10 seconds tops, and then off again is probably the best way to treat these saws, right? So decompression valve, what I would do if you're not pull ready is I would, at a minimum, pull this out and push that back in. It's automatically going to leave it in high idle just in case somebody's fired it. It's going to make it less likely to flood, right? Because it's going to want to kick that over quicker. So just a little something. Do with it what you feel. These right here have a primer bulb, but we never end up using them. Right, they're just not necessary to use on these saws. These saws fire up very easily, not hard starting at all, so we end up not using these. The only time I may consider using one of these is if it was a completely empty tank and you just filled it with fuel and you're trying to get fuel into the carburetor for the first time. But if you got a normal running saw and you're doing some work and you recognize that it's getting low on fuel and you shut it off before it completely runs out, there's no need to do any priming. It's only an empty tank thing. I'll just give you my recommendation on carrying these. So I like to call this the bulky side of the saw, where it kind of bubbles out this way, right? That's where the starter cord is. And this right here is the flat side of the saw. We like to carry these on the flat side against your body. So take the saw like this. Air pack's in the center, and it's just right alongside the air pack. And you still got your hands for carrying tools or holding onto the ladder beam or whatever. This is something to get you to the roof, but before we make any cuts, just right at the edge of the roof, right by your ladder, just so you don't forget it on the roof, right by where your ladder is coming up to the roof, just take this real quick, leave it by the wall or by the ladder, and from that point on, just carry it to wherever you're going to make your cut. All right. We talked about earlier how you can adjust these shrouds, right? In most cases, you're going to have this in a full forward position. That's going to give you the most appropriate working angle, right? This is my normal working stance. When I'm working with this saw, even though there's a handle here, I don't want to hold the handle and make the cut. That commits a lot of my body weight forward, and it also pushes the blade subconsciously. You don't realize you're doing it, but just adrenaline's dumping, you're working. You end up pushing the blade into the material. To better feel the roof, you actually want to just have this hand lightly controlling the throttle. It's really not doing too much except pulling the saw in the cut direction, and you want to put your hand on the air box. So the air box kind of becomes your handle. So as I'm cutting, I'm pushing the throttle and I'm doing this, and every time I feel the roof rafter, I just float the saw up and over, right? Feel another one there. All right, so here I have a member here, so I'll just respond to it the way I normally would, okay? So I'll be coming up with my cut. I'll begin to feel it. I'll lightly roll over it and back into the cut, okay? And I'm just standing like this now, but you never want to have your feet this close to the blade. I'd always be standing behind the saw, all right? We're just gonna get into the air filter inspection. This is the air box up here, this gray portion. There's 4 screws that we gotta get out, off of here. All right, here's the air filter here. If you ever had to change it, it's got that single nut, pretty, self-explanatory. And this is it here, right? So the inside should always be clean, of course, but if you see these outer fins get gummed up with material, doing their job the way they should, pull it out of service, get a new one put on there, and just right back on. Make sure it's fully seated. And spark plugs in here. I don't know if you guys are going to be getting into that, but spark plugs right under there. Shouldn't be part of your normal inspection, but if you foul the plug, that's where you change it.